Yo, we are live. I am trying to get sound and everything set up. I think I'm actually muted right now. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think I'm connected at all. Give me a second. All right. Yada, yada, yada. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Let's see. Are we good? Are we good? We got sound there. We got sound. All right. Tux will be joining us in a little bit. Hopefully, B.S. Lewis will also come on in. I'm going to send the invites out right now. We will do some highlights if we don't get too many people in here. And then we'll do a real discussion of this video next week. Um, I have a new work schedule. I got promoted. There we go. There we go. Got the sound. And so we'll see what happens next week. But yeah. Okay, so for those that don't know, we were just watching a live discussion on biblical slavery. We are looking for, let me see. Looking for a few things to talk about today. Oh, there's people already here. Okay. For those watching in incognito, give me a few seconds to set everything up. I wasn't sure I was going to do a live stream on this one, so. For those that are watching, the first question is, which stream did you watch? I watched on Kips. I didn't watch on Myth Visions. So who'd you watch it on? Did you watch on Dr. Bowen's? Did you watch on Digital Hammurabi? Let me know. The invite's in the chat, Tux, if you want to go ahead and hop on in. So I kind of felt, I don't know, maybe a little confused by the show. I kind of left the topic less sure than I started off with the topic. I still agree mostly with Joshua Bowen's take, but I did like that Trent Horn had some really good comments. I think this is the best showing I've seen from Trent Horn in maybe the last 2 years. It was really good, and he's had some good showings, but this was really good. Mm. And I'll be doing some highlights from the show in a little bit once we get set up. We're not even set up yet, so if you're watching right now and you're wondering what's going on, nothing's going on. We haven't started yet. Okay. Just sending out the invites on all the socials. You know how it goes. I saw that there were a few impasses in the discussion also. I'm not sure which one was the best or the worst show. I think Trent did a great job. I think Kip didn't say that much. Joshua had a lot to say. He was a little bit more emotionally driven than all the rest. Gavin was mostly defending his points and kind of admitted that he's coming from a theological, not kind of, he admitted that he's coming from a theological framework. I did like that they did start arguing about whether or not a univocal or inspired point of view was supposed to be the right way, or each one should be viewed individually in its own context, out of the context of the greater narrative. I like that there was a little bit of pushback there between all parties involved. That was cool. Okay. All right. All right. I'm almost done inviting people in. All right. Okay, we're good. All right. Let me re-put the invitation, and then we'll start everything else. Wowzers, I look like crap. Okay. Oh, let me open up YouTube. YouTuber. Okay. And let's use Digital Hammurabi's for anything, any kind of catch-up video we're going to be doing on this, okay? Okay, perfect. All right, and let's share screen. Setting. And we'll do a real breakdown of everything they said later on. Right now, I got the debate between Trent Horn, the tag team debate with Trent Horn and Jimmy Aiken done. I'm now editing it. Maybe it's going to take a little bit more time. And let's see. I also have a video coming up on Tertullian, so that's going to be fun. And I'm just going to play a little bit of highlights here. Please go watch their channels. Please support everyone who's involved. I don't know that Trent has a Patreon, but Gavin needs money. Look at him. That's a man who's broke. That's like a cardboard cutout that he has in the back. It's a picture of things that he once owned. Let's see. Here we go. So let's play a little bit at a time. We'll discuss a little bit. We'll go little 5-minute increments like we used to do back in the day when my channel was smaller. Not that it's large now, but hey, whatever. Okay, let's go. Start off at the 5-minute mark. I think they're just kind of being nice to each other in the beginning. Actually, I really thought the cordialness and they didn't talk past each other, which was great. This was one of the best debates / discussions I've seen in a long time. Everyone brought their A game. Everyone was listening to each other. Everybody disagreed with each other, but no one was being inflammatory. It was really good. It was really good to see. All right.
Clarify where the disagreements are. So even if we just have a modest goal like that, I think that's tremendously valuable.
Thank you. Yeah. I am just going to be hosting today, kind of refereeing if necessary, but to help nudge this to go along. Because sometimes in these kind of conversations, we get so caught up in the weeds that we don't realize how do we get out of the ditch and back on the road heading to the next destination. So we're going to cover several topics in different locations, I imagine, in the Bible. I'm hoping to nudge us along as we go, but they know what they're going to want to talk about more than me. So I feel like my only involvement will be if someone's hogging the mic, and I don't mean any disrespect. I'm going to try and be as balanced and neutral and fair.
Didn't interrupt
I am on
at all.
everyone's side on this.
I think the only time he might have said anything was either he was yelling or talking to his kid, or he was telling Josh to shut it down because he was going too long. I think it's the only time he really interrupted at all. He did great. Dr. Joshua Bowen seems to be suffering from or been infected by the Jimmy Aiken disease, which is slides, and more slides. We don't have a cure for that yet, but we're working on it. Here we go.
You know, where it came from and where it's going. So in preparing for tonight and thinking through tonight, we thought it was useful to start with this question of what slavery, what was slavery like as described in the Hebrew Bible. So we've come up with a basic definition, which is fairly similar to numerous definitions of slavery from specialists on the topic. We define slavery in this context as a condition in which an individual or rights to their labor is owned by another, either temporarily or permanently. The owner controls and may benefit from the actions and activities of the owned individual. So there are three primary sections in the law collections of the Old Testament that concern slavery. And this is really where a lot of Josh's and my interest is focused. The first is in Exodus 21, which deals with Hebrew male debt slaves that can only be made to work as a slave for 6 years to completely pay off their debt. The law allows them to convert their status to chattel slave if they are given a slave wife with whom he produces children who belong to the master and his property, and he wishes to remain with them. Then verses 7-11 concern a female slave that is sold by her father to pay on a debt. She is not to be released, as she has been taken as either a concubine or a wife. Given the
For those of you who watched the debate, what did you guys think of Gavin's defense on all aspects of these? I thought it was, when I say apologetical, I don't mean like apologetics in a bad way, not the way that I usually use it, but I mean as in he was apologizing, not argumenting, but actually apologizing for some of these a little bit too heavily, and he was committed to defending them even if he disagreed with their implications. I don't know if anyone noticed that or if anyone had an opinion on that.
in the use of her sexual capacities, she has been devalued, and the law seeks to protect that vulnerable state. Verses 20 to 21 and then 26 to 27 describe what would happen to a debt slave that was killed by a beating. The master would be killed. If he did not die from the beating, however, the master was not to be punished.
Also, I thought Kip did a good job of, I'm going to say controlling his temper, not that he has one, but he did a good job of not getting offended at some of the things he sometimes gets offended at when he's doing a more general show. Wow, I am still sweating from my workout.
If the master were to knock out the eye or the tooth of a slave, which is regarded as a serious offense in the book of Exodus, the debt slave was to be released and the debt forgiven. So the second set of laws appears in Deuteronomy 15. Verses 12 to 18 covers much of what was covered in Exodus, but with some developments. In particular, an Israelite debt slave was to be released with sufficient provisions so as not to easily fall back into debt. And the female slaves are to be treated as the male slaves. And then finally, there's another section in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 39 to 55, where we see slavery rules for both Israelites, and now this is new, Israelites as well as foreigners. So Israelites that sell themselves to other Israelites are not.
To the person who just commented that I seem like a nice person, hop in the room and actually talk.
To be treated as slaves, according to Leviticus 25, but rather as hired workers and set free in the year of Jubilee, which is every 50th year and not every 7th year, as I see so frequently on Twitter.
That was good. That was an interesting little twist that Dr. Kip just said. It's 50 years, not 7 years. I think I've made that mistake more than a few times.
Excuse me. This release was also required if an Israelite sold himself to a foreigner, and a near relative was to do all they could to redeem that.
Another question I have for those listening is, do you think they got to all the topics that they needed to cover on this issue in this debate? Or do you think that maybe they should have done like a 3-hour, like a 7-hour stream or an 8-hour stream, like a Stitch and Adam style, just open conversation and just go everywhere and cover everything? What do you guys think? Do you think that would have served this topic better?
Israelite who had sold themselves. However, these rules did not apply to foreigners. Those from the surrounding nations and from tenant farmers living in their midst could be taken as permanent or chattel slaves. They could be kept for life, passed on as an inheritance, and made to serve permanently. Now, the laws that we see in the Hebrew Bible differ little from what we see in the rest of the ancient Near East.
So it's interesting that he says that here, because later on there's going to be a lot of good pushback against this claim right here. All right, let's jump ahead another 5 minutes. Like I said, we're not trying to rewatch the whole thing. We're just trying to get a feel for the show. Let's see. Let's go to 20. And the breakdown on this is going to take a while because they covered a lot. So when I do my breakdown video, it's probably not going to be this Sunday, but the following Sunday. This Sunday will be the Trent Horn debate, Tertullian, and I think I have another video coming up as well.
This is something where we certainly have common ground, and actually he and I have a lot of common ground. There could be other Protestants, even Catholics, who would approach the issue a little differently. I think I'm just going to add a few points just to supplement some of what Gavin's.
You know, I'll say this for Trent Horn. Hey, Lisa. Let me add you in. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Alan.
Did you already have your cataract surgery?
No,
No. Okay. How long till that happens?
next month.
Next month? Well, not that you care about this part, but you're in my prayers. I hope it goes well. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So did you watch the debate?
Which debate?
This
I
debate,
usually
the
don't
one where-
watch debates.
No, you don't watch Jonathan? So do you recognize this guy from I was gonna say from Ben Grimm, from Garmania? He used to come on the show with Pat, the archaeologist. I was actually gonna super chat into his room the question, who is Garmania? And I decided.
I know Dr. Josh.
So this is Dr. Kip Davis. I don't know much about him.
I
on
know of
YouTube.
Chip Davis.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. This is Dr. Gavin Ortlund. I love this guy. He's a little bit more accurate than Joe Heschmeyer, but he still falls into apologetical tricks a lot. This is Trent Horn. This is him and Jimmy Akin are the two best Catholic apologists out there on the scene right now. I was about to say that he has some bad tendencies when it comes toward his apologetical toolbox. And when he was on with Jimmy Akin, they both countered each other's worst tendencies, and they were actually like a super team, even though they both seemed kind of bored with each other. And here, in the same way, Gavin Ortlund was a really good counterbalance to Trent's more grumpy nature recently. So I think Trent Horn, if he's going to keep doing these really great style debates like he's doing now, he should start doing these team ups with people with slightly more ecumenical or more open temperaments. And then, of course, we all know Dr. Josh, and we all love Dr. Josh.
Yeah. I like him. He's
Okay, go ahead.
he's sort of like me, except with a lot more knowledge.
Well,
Because he's an ex evangelical atheist, you know.
Just to oppose you, Lisa, I'm going to say he's just like me, except he's not as smart as I am.
He's got a PhD in archaeology. I have a minor in archaeology, and I actually only have like, I don't know, 12 to 15 hours to earn my major in archaeology. But I was accepted into a master's in mental health before I could get my archaeology degree. So, you know,
Lisa, let me interrupt for 1 second so I can read a chat. I do have, let me let everyone know, I am trying to get to super chats. I'm 200 hours away from super chats. I do have a Patreon. I do have StreamYard. If you guys want to donate, you can donate there. You can buy merch there. Patreon, I'm going to start setting up tiers. And I do want to read the question that just came in. Feel free to respond to this one as well, Lisa. And it's that David Brown says they definitely did not cover all the topics. I agree. Gavin and Ortlund and Horn conceded a lot of ground, arguing that yes, slavery was a feature of ancient Israel, but there were improvements over neighboring cultures. I also agree with that. when I look at Roman slavery and I look at other forms of ancient slavery, I think the Israel version seems to be better than at least the Helot situation with Sparta. And also, there's kind of a controversy with Egyptology and whether or not their slaves were really slaves or whether their slaves were actually paid servants. I don't know enough on that to give a good breakdown, but I know that some Egyptologists have argued that what the other cultures viewed as slavery was actually not slavery because they were actually paying them in bread and wine, and that was their currency, was food. So I don't know
Well,
if that's true.
if you're talking about the pyramids, they were definitely not slaves. They were
Mhm.
like uh you know how men have to register for the draft, and if there's a war and there's not enough people in the military, then we go to the draft to pick people to go to war.
Yeah.
It was like that, except every man had to serve the pharaoh, and unless you were a servant in pharaoh's household or or in government somehow, that's how you served the pharaoh for x amount of years, is building the pyramids.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was gonna state, but I'm not sure where Dr. Josh would actually sit on this or fit on this argument because he is so, and I don't mean this in a negative. He is so emotional about the slavery. I'm not sure. I think he might actually consider the servitude of the Egyptian workers slavery. I'm not sure on that. I just get that vibe from the way that he talks about this topic.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about, you have to do it, then sure, but they were compensated.
Well, okay, so for you, if you're gonna, and I'm hoping you're not going to defend slavery, but if you're going to defend slavery,
Of course
if
not.
if the people who are slaves are being paid, because there is actually slave wages, that's an actual thing. So if they're getting some kind of compensation, even if it's below the minimum, should that change the way that we talk about slavery?
No, but what you're not getting is they lived in a town. They were supplied with food and drink, and the things that they needed, clothes, and you know and stuff
Yeah,
like
but
that.
the slaves in the South were also given all those things. So, and I know that my ancestors, when they were being enslaved by the Spaniards and the French, they were given food and Bibles and crosses and clothing. And I'm pretty sure the guerrillas and the people who I went to college with who really hated the Catholics, um, I'm pretty sure they would still call it slavery, even though these people were giving education, they were given food. I'm not talking about the South as in Mississippi. I'm talking about like San Luis Potosí. I'm talking about Mexico City. I'm talking about Venezuela. I'm talking about in all these areas, you have the native people being turned into slaves,
Hmm.
but they're given food and clothing and education and culture and even status in exchange for their servitude. But it was still slavery and it was still cultural destruction.
Well, hang on. There's there's a lot of noise outside my window right now.
Okay, well, while you're handling that, I'm going to play a little bit more so the audience continues to get.
and say, because I'm basically in agreement. From a Catholic perspective, Pope Benedict XVI once said, biblical revelation is deeply rooted in history. God's plan is manifested progressively. It's accomplished slowly in successive stages, and despite human resistance, God chose a people and patiently worked to guide and educate them.
I did like that Trent did throw in the Catholic stuff and to throw in some papal statements. I'm not sure if they were ready for that or they were expecting that. I'm not sure anyone in this room was impressed by that, considering you have an ex evangelical. I don't know if Dr. Kipp is religious at all. You have a Baptist who is or was a Calvinist. So I'm not sure if anyone there was actually impressed by Trent's papal statement, but I like that he did it.
What's a Calvinist? I've
Calvinist.
never heard that term.
Calvinist.
Oh,
Calvin.
Calvinist. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So I don't know if he still is, but Gavin was a Reformed Baptist. Recently, he said things that make me think that he might have left the Reformation, or not the Reformation. Sorry, he's still a Protestant. He might have left the Calvinistic, the Reformed Party. I'm not really sure. I know that Redeemed Zoomer also went through kind of a deepening of Calvinism and kind of switched his belief system to a slightly different one. So I don't know what's going on there with Calvinism currently, but I think they're in trouble. Okay, I'm gonna keep playing then.
Saying is, so that's what I'll do here. What I hear you saying is that the ancient world needs to be understood in its broader context, right? So when we have passages like, "Look, you can beat them," and they use a wooden rod, that this is terrible. Yeah, but the problem is that this was sort of, as you read in Proverbs 13, and probably 4 or 5 other passages in the Proverbs, as Trent said, you do this to kids, right? So
I'm surprised that no one on this team brought up the fact that the way that Gavin, not so much Trent, but the way that Gavin is interpreting these texts is assuming that Genesis was written before this text came about. And I don't know if that's the actual academic stance. I don't know if in actual history, if the data, I hate using that term, but if the data shows that Genesis is older than Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So I like that Gavin was making the kind of Christian arguments that are strong, but I kind of wanted the academics in the room to push back on some of the, if you want to call it, presuppositions that Gavin holds, just to see how Gavin defends them. What about you, Lisa? How do you feel about presuppositions when they enter arguments?
That's a no-go. You have to show your work. I mean, there are axioms that we can all agree on, but we have to all agree on them. And that's the problem, because you may, and I'm not talking about you personally.
Yeah. Don't worry about apologizing. Just hit hard, Lisa. I can take punches.
I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about you, the general you. You may argue from a presuppositional stance, but you have to understand I'm a presuppositionalist. Now, again, there are axioms, but when you're talking about axioms, you're talking about a whole different thing. You're not talking about theology when you're talking about axioms. So if you're gonna be a presuppositionalist, fine, but just remember, I do not agree with you. And if you
let me push back a little bit on you, Lisa. So most and this doesn't happen so much anymore on YouTube. You know, back when the Blood Sports days were on, now you got to go to Clubhouse and TikTok for this kind of stuff. But most most atheists will come in with some brute facts, and I can't tell you what the difference between a brute fact is and a presupposition. They're both undeniable. They both can't be disproven, and they're both the assumption that underlines the argument being given. So if it's fair game for an atheist to come in with a brute fact, then it is fair game for a Christian or any denomination to come in with a presupposition, isn't it not?
Well, no, see, that's my problem is nobody's really explained to me what a brute fact is to my and it could be my dumb brain, but nobody's explained to me what a brute fact is to my satisfaction. I know it has something to do with it. It's just something that is.
Okay, first I'm going to give you first a definition from Wiki, and then I'll give you a definition from Stanford. Let's see who hopped in here. Oh, we have a celebrity. Everybody get ready. It's the man of the hour, the man with too many suits who wears one too many, the man with such beautiful hair you can't even see it, the one, the only, Jimmy Tux.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant.
Hey, Jimmy.
Well, good evening.
All right, we're just going over brute facts. Let me do this for Lisa real quick, okay?
Okay.
In contemporary philosophy, a brute fact is a fact that cannot be explained in terms of a deeper or more fundamental fact. Stanford has it put this way: a brute fact is a fact that is unexplained, a fact which there is no explanation for. That is a brute fact, and I don't see the difference between a brute fact and a presupposition. Lisa, go ahead and respond. I'll let Tux also help defend you on this one, but if you want to go first, since that's where we were at.
Okay. So I would say a brute fact is what? 1 + 1 = 2.
A brute fact would be more like gravity, wouldn't it? The assumption that
I
gravity
don't
is
think it
real.
would be 1 + 2 because that is a agreed upon. I don't know these terminologies, but that's an agreed upon. I'm drawing a blank. But
Wouldn't be like
we've
the Big
agreed
Bang or
that
something
one
like
has
that?
a signature and 2 has a signature. If you have 2 of one, that makes 2, and so on and so on. But I don't believe that's a brute fact because we could change the definition of 1 to be X. We could change the definition of 2 to be B, for instance. So I
What
don't
about you,
believe
Jimmy?
that would be in a brute fact.
Do you think that there is a difference when we're debating these kind of topics, and it's Christian versus atheist or anti-theist versus theist? Do you think that there is a difference between a brute fact and a presupposition in the argumentative form?
Okay, in the context of the atheist reading scripture or the apologists apologizing for it. Defending it, not apologizing.
Let's say we're having a low bar, creationist, there were no dinosaurs kind of argument versus, the genetics prove that we've been here for 6 billion years, and the Christian goes, well, if you look at the Bible and blah blah blah, and they're coming up with the presupposition that the Bible story is a univocal voice, that it's narratively true, that these are the facts as presented in the Bible, this is reality, and the atheist is coming in with, well, look, here are the accepted facts that I deal with, and they contradict your accepted facts. So now we're talking, it's brute fact versus presupposition. I don't see a difference there in the interlock, in the argument. I'm not talking about like in substantial reality.
I don't know how to answer that because there's too many presuppositions from the Christian. I mean, I have my presupposition, even though I would be, my presupposition that this is all human and 0% of it came from a supernatural being. Now, there could be a supernatural being that's in charge of us. There could be a supernatural being that did it by breathing into the test tube, and that's what scientists are referring to the Big Bang. I'm willing to go along with that there is a creator being or something in charge of us or some variation of a God. But what I'm denying in any kind of my presupposition is 100% of what's written as the source of who this God is, that is human. And 0% of it is God.
If you don't mind, are you ready to get into the conversation of the debate?
I'd love to. This is, I mean, it's not my wheelhouse, but I'm fairly knowledgeable about it, and I feel like at the conclusion, Trent Horn gives the game away, in my opinion. Like, to me, in his closing statement.
Do you wanna let's start there. How do you feel? How do you think he did that?
Play it. It's probably about 9 minutes to go, I would say, in the stream.
Let me see. It's about there?
Yeah, he's talking right about there.
Lisa, I know this is your first time watching this part of the debate, so after me and Tux go, feel free to give your summary of our thoughts and what your opinion is, okay?
Sure.
And of how God dealt with them. And they should.
You want me to back it up just a
And I
little
think
bit?
Gavin, I agree. There is a trajectory. I agree there's a trajectory, and it needs to continue beyond Leviticus 25.
That should be all right.
That the goal here in the Old Testament is to help the Israelites to see, love your neighbor as yourself. Like Jesus didn't invent that. That's in Leviticus 19. But by the time of Christ, we see that gets expanded. Love your neighbor. Who's my neighbor? It's not just a fellow Israelite. It's the Samaritan. It's the person it's just another human you absolutely despise. And that expanding of who our neighbor is what contributed to the unique phenomena that it was France, I think, in the 14th century. That was the first kingdom to ever outlaw slavery. Still continued on in the New World, in China and Asia. That expansion of who is my neighbor, who is the person made in the image of God, I do think goes only back what Gavin said to Genesis 1. And for us, I appreciate you guys, and Josh, I really appreciate your book. And as we talk about this, it is very important to get the facts correct, but you can tell there's always this instinctual tug. So what? What are the philosophical, religious implications of this? And I think it's good for us to check the facts and then deeply meditate on their implications.
I'll just briefly state my own uncertainty.
So what?
I'm not sure. It might have been right before that. He might go back in. He might butt back in and do a clarification one more time.
Right there? Where he's kind of popping up?
I don't know.
No.
Maybe.
Let's see. Who's talking?
Belongs to him.
No, it's Kip.
I don't remember it. Kip had the last word, so I don't believe it was it. I think it was just before.
Do what?
He did.
Probably got a
He
whole
was
movie
eating
in.
He was back there eating.
They're closing out.
was editing
his
a
work.
Yeah, go
hold
back
on.
to
We got a
the
comment. Let me-
325 or the 225 area.
25. Okay, while I'm doing that, let me go ahead and read this comment real quick.
Yeah, right there. Let's start there. Let's try there.
Dave Brown says, another thought. It's not just atheists versus Christians. Tens of millions of liberal Christians do not believe in biblical inerrancy. And basically agree with Bowen and Kip's analysis on biblical slavery. Well, I think you can believe in inerrancy and still hold to Dr. Bowen's and Kip's understanding, but you have to sacrifice your belief that slavery is morally wrong. And I think there was a really good spot during the debate when Trent was caught in that trap and Gavin refused to answer. Gavin just bowed out. And Trent had to reply and say, that it's not morally wrong, but he couldn't say the words "it's not morally wrong." Instead, they both did this roundabout way, instead of just saying what I've said when me and Tux debated this, which is it's amoral. It's an amoral position. It's not an immoral or moral position. The Bible is amoral on it. It's not making a declarative statement that it's right and wrong. And neither Gavin nor Trent, and I don't mean this in a negative way. I thought they did great. Neither of them had the balls to say that. Both of them were trying to find a way to still morally condemn slavery while saying that, oh, but in this version of slavery, it was all right because it needed to be allowed. And I thought that was a little bit weak of them, instead of just coming out and saying it like
That's
I did.
That's kind of what I was talking about, actually. I think that's what Trent says. And
You want me to go ahead and hit play?
yeah, you're pretty close to where he starts.
Violence, right? So whatever it is that we say are developments, these foreign slaves don't get that. And so I think that's probably an important point to sort of emphasize, because we didn't get there. So yeah, I said I'd be short, so there I was. That was short.
And I think what I would say is that slavery was a universal human institution in a time before, essentially before reliable forms of credit could be invented.
Right here.
And
Go ahead,
it's
pause it.
no coincidence. Reliable forms of credit.
Okay. You've got a God on the top of a mountain, Moses bringing down that God's commandments. In that God's commandments, does he say no slavery? Set up a system of credit, checks and balances. Here's a system that will eliminate the ownership of human beings by debtors, by owners, by masters, or anything like that. He brings down the 10 commandments. He does this song and dance because we lose those, but we have the conversation for what was in them. And it immediately goes to, in Exodus 21, it immediately goes to how to take care of slaves in basically round one. Right? In my opinion, the moment that you have basically 10 commandments, if you eliminate the first 4, you then have 7. You basically consolidate 1 through 4 as 1, and you have 7. And the way that it goes into great detail, the last 3 commandments of the 10 commandments is how to take care of slaves, how to treat slaves, how to be a good slave, how to indebt yourself, how to be released from the debt if you aren't from one of the other, if you're from one of the countries around you, then you're property, so on and so on. The amount of detail in Exodus 21 comparative to everything that's in Exodus 20, that is a system, that is a moment where God is ordaining exactly how to take care of slaves in one form or another. Now, from the human, my view that this is just human written, this is designed deception, and it is designed to make people slaves. And they touch on Genesis 9 earlier multiple times. Now, I don't know if they specifically talk about Ham and Canaan, but there's no reason to enslave the youngest son and no reason to enslave your grandson because of whatever your youngest son did.
So Gavin did try to, either Gavin or Trent, it might have been Trent, tried to bring up the Canaanite situation and tried to bring up some of that, but it was so off topic that they just kind of breezed right by it. Let me give Lisa a chance to talk just because we haven't let her speak. Lisa, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I'm against slavery in all its forms. And the one thing they haven't touched on, and maybe they've touched on this in the whole debate, which I have not watched, because I'm just not really interested in debates, but is they have not touched on the women slaves, because women are slaves for life. I don't see that they touched on that.
They do actually.
Yeah,
Gavin and Josh, I think, go around with two on that.
but they were going in the weeds, in my opinion, on because they were bouncing back and forth between Hammurabi and Leviticus 25.
I'm surprised they didn't bring up anything from the Hittite communities or anything from other communities which also had similar law codes. They seem to be really concentrating on the contrast between Hammurabi and the Ten Commandments. And I thought that was kind of weak on both sides because there's other places they could have gone.
It's just because I'm a woman, you know, and I don't know. It just it grinds my gears when when not just men, women too, that they tend to forget. It's just the men slaves that can go free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the example that I think you're referring to, that if the man has a wife given to him by his master, then he has to choose between the family and become a slave himself. But
Lisa, in these cultures, women weren't given agency. Even in the cultures that had the most free women, whether it's Sparta or whether it's Scythia, the women were still subject to their men. They still had to do what the men told them to do. They were still property. The idea of women's rights just did not exist. And children and women were seen as lower beings in some of these cultures that weren't even considered fully human. So it's a really ugly thing, but it's a reality of what, when the Bible was written, whether you think it was written at the point that it's talking about or it's written at a slightly later point, there was no agency for women, not in the way that we understand it today. And that's unfortunate, but that is something that is true across cultures. That's not a Bible or Hebrew or Christian thing. That's the entire ancient world. You see very few cultures where women have agency. And even in the modern tribes that we find where there is female agency, the power dynamic and the power difference between the strength of the male and the strength of the value of the woman ends up having to do with having parentage and having children, and it ends up being about mating. So just the ancient world and the way biology is set up, it is not fair to women at all. I just don't know what else I could say on that. Talk.
yeah,
Well,
in
all
the
of the
Exodus 20, when you're referring to thou shalt not covet, for instance, the property is the wife.
Yeah.
The property is your goods and your livestock. You becoming a wife meant that you became, instead of your father's property, your
husband's
property.
And even then,
was
if
just
there's
a
a
transfer.
hierarchy, it would be the head of the household even would have more control and say than just namely your husband. So if there's a patriarch in that family, he's the one in charge of the entire family. So yeah, it's not a fair system.
Yeah, but I do have to disagree with you about all societies were patriarchal, because there were some matriarchal societies, not in the ancient Near East. A lot of them were in the Americas, but just want to point that
a
out.
lot of that stuff
There
has
were
been
some
debunked.
matriarchal societies.
Lisa, a lot of that stuff has been debunked. It was mostly have to do with feminist perspective and feminist writings, rewriting history to try to give women agency in history. But like I said, when you actually looked at the dynamics, the female was controlling these men through mate selection. So it wasn't as if the woman was able to be as powerful as she wanted to be. It would be like saying because Queen Victoria exists, because Queen Elizabeth exists, because the Empress Wu existed, that women had equality in China and in ancient England. It just isn't true. Yes, these exceptional women did great things, but the way that men treated women in those societies is not anything we would allow today in a man and female relationship in a modern Western context. So it's still incredibly brutal and incredibly misogynistic. And in the terms of slavery, which is what we're talking about, what would happen to women is unspeakable. Children were not considered valuable, and women were considered just barely better than children because they were, able to talk and do work. These are not, especially in the Hebrew cultures and the Canaanite cultures, these are patriarchal cultures. So
That is correct.
yeah.
Anyway, I have got a headache.
Okay.
I've had one all day, and I just wanted to come in and see what was up. So I think I'm just gonna go lay down. Thanks for having me on, Alpha.
You're welcome. Have a great night, and you're in my prayers. Hope everything goes well.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, Lisa. Thank you.
Good night.
Okay. I'm going to play the next section, and then we can just start debating as we go. Okay.
Okay.
Yours, but just something to kind of push into
I'm
it
going to
as
do
well.
it in 5
Is this
minutes. Every 5
progression
minutes, just hop
or
around.
development? And I think Trent and I will probably be similar here, though he can speak to this too, is an organic one. So it's not like God pulling back the curtain and saying, haha, here's something totally new you'd never heard of before. But the principles embedded are growing organically, so that Genesis 1 is at the start of it all. So
All right, so let's go with that. What do you think of that argument? Do you think it holds any water? What do you think?
I don't really see how a defense of slavery is in Genesis 1. The way they attack it is that there can't be slavery if God owns you. And one of the thoughts that came to mind when they were kind of presenting this, who is the possession, who is the dominated, who is the
Who's the possessor? Who's the object?
Subdue, all the words that are usually translated to it. The thing is then if that were indeed true, the David census would then, the reason that there has to be punishment for the David census is because David counted something that wasn't his. So if he needs to know, for instance, who he's got to go to war, and he counts it, but I don't know, there seems to be a disconnect that if you have the reasoning that having a census is somehow bad because that's somebody else's, you're counting somebody else's property, being God's. Having censuses is then, and the way it's turned around that I'm familiar with is when they retell the story, it's actually David didn't order the census, Satan ordered the census, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't really quite understand if you suggest that God owns it and therefore it's his and therefore it can't be slavery, but we've all been subdued, then he's basically saying we're all slaves.
Well,
All of us, which is my argument that this book is designed for you to be a slave.
The way that
Except-
Dr. Kipp and Joshua argued it was not through that aspect, through the David, but through the Egyptian, God rescuing the Egyptians because they are his God rescuing the Israelites from the Egyptians because they are his slave, they're his property. They didn't have the right to enslave the Israelite people because they belong to God. But there is an other way to look at it, which is the whole world is the creation, and thus the slave, or all of creation is slave to God. So I think that you're correct. One of the aspects that they didn't talk about was the New Testament aspect, which is that Jesus takes on the form of a slave. We are slaves to Jesus. Our freedom is in slavitude, is in servitude. They didn't get into that. I wish they had. The Old Testament scholar guys did not seem to want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And Gavin and Trent seem to want to interject that into the conversation to talk about the progression of liberation here from those seeds of the Imago Dei, which is the image of God. But I'm curious if, because I have a lot of Jewish rabbinical writings that I love reading, I'm curious if how the Jewish culture, the Jewish society would have seen the image of God in their non-Israelite neighbors. So I'm more than positive that the Bible itself is identifying the Israelites as the image bearers. I'm more than positive that it's claiming that, but I would not stretch it so far as in to say that you're also seeing the image of God in the other. Yeah, maybe in the stranger, because you're worried that it's God in disguise because it's an angel in disguise, but not so much the enemy, who is the one who broke away and doesn't share your image, doesn't have your cultural differentiation. I'm just speculating here, obviously.
I think it's an excellent point, actually. Yeah, under the Christian umbrella, everybody is under the same God, but under the Hebrew umbrella, it was just the Hebrews, the Israel's. Israel was the chosen. They're the ones that were created. The other ones just happened along.
I've read Jewish commentary where they're saying that Adam and Eve are not the ancestor of all mankind. They're the ancestor of the Jewish people. Obviously, that's a fringe view, but I've seen that view in Jewish commentary. So it's not as if the Jewish people were looking at the other cultures and seeing them as valuable outside of that. They might be cousins or distantly related to Abraham, to Shem, to some different Ishmael, some different character that got exiled out. All right, let's jump ahead another 5 minutes.
And by the way, to back up, have I ever told you this one? One of the reasons that I have drawn the conclusion that this is merely a Ponzi scheme, phishing scheme, Nigerian prince scam, that the Bible is basically design deception in those types of scams and schemes, is that when you have the person who is bestowed slaves by Noah, his name is Shem, and that this is literally a Ponzi scheme that's called the name Ponzi scheme, the name phishing scam, because Shem means name.
The name. So
and
let me say this for the people that are watching and people that are watching later. Me and Tux do disagree here. I'm a Catholic. He's an atheist. Just FYI, don't get scared, people watching. But the second thing that I want to say is, and I was going to mention this earlier when you brought this up, before Lisa jumped in, before we invited her in, was that I've been at work with a specific job that I used to have, where I was being asked to do something that was humiliating, and I thought of these gospel tenets, and that is what made me follow through with the task that I was given. Not the fact that I wanted to do it or that I willed to do it, but that the Bible tells me I'm supposed to obey. So I obeyed. And so to go to your argument, I can see that case being made. Now, I think any good Christian of any standing is going to say back to you, but you can't say that because look at what we have to do to enculturate slaves. We have to edit the Bible to a slave Bible. No matter what culture, and once you start getting into liberation theology, whether it's heretical or not, It's in the Bible, and you have that call of freedom, and those seeds are planted in the Bible, whether you like it or not. So you do have to whitewash or filter out those seeds if you're going to have a society that's going to completely submit to whoever the authority is. And that's something that has always been the case with the biblical literature, even before it was a single canon.
By the way, I have the same bow tie that Dr. Josh Bound. I should have grabbed it. It's upstairs. I should have grabbed it.
I'm going to be really blunt. I've been experimenting in my mind with the idea of starting to wear a suit for these shows. Now that I'm doing it on a daily, and now that I have a Patreon and I'm trying to grow an audience, I'm like, I should look a little bit more professional, you know?
I have a tuxedo jacket that I have right next to draped over a chair that I wear sometimes just to, but you know, you can see that you can't really see that I'm wearing it sometimes. So
okay, let's jump ahead. I haven't played this one yet, right?
I'll let Trent speak what he would speak on this.
Yeah, I would say that they are bad in the same way that pain and death are bad. But
So I'm surprised because I never heard Trent give this argument before, but this is the argument that I gave you when we had the debate, which is that it's a conditional. Slavery is bad as in it's a condition, not bad as in it's an evil, which is why I don't like it when people conflate the problem of suffering with the problem of evil. I think those are two completely different things. And you had a great
could you
comeback.
have both arguments that I brought up for his clothes? Like, can you have the 10 Commandments and then explicit slavery instructions instead of saying, hey, guess what? I've got a solution to, you know, instead of a welfare system that is surrounding upon an owner, instead of a subjective female companionship made permanent, you know all these things, like the dominoes just keep falling anytime you try to tackle one. As a whack-a-mole.
Well, let me give my response as the Christian here.
Yeah.
So for me, I've gone through both cancer and diabetes, and luckily the cancer was just a cancer scare, but I still had to go through the treatment, had to go through the whole thing. And I've met people, and my dad is one of these people who he didn't want to take the steps to prevent Alzheimer's because he felt it meant that he would get it. And I was of the mindset when I lost my ability to walk of I'm going to do whatever it takes to get healthy again. I don't care. There's nothing that's going to stop me. So I looked up every crazy diet. I looked up everything I could do to gain my ability to walk back, to gain my functionality back. And yeah, it meant a restrictive diet. It meant following rules. But the rules for having cancer and surviving, the rules for having diabetes and getting over it, which is supposed to be impossible, but more and more people are doing, those rules exist not because we're endorsing cancer or slavery. That's a complete misunderstanding, misapplication of those rules. We're saying this is how to live with this disease, and this is how to be as functional as possible, even if the scientists and the doctors all say you're crazy for doing this. When you do these things, it is a better life while still having this condition. You're not going to solve, there's no diet that's going to cure cancer. There's no diet that's going to prevent your cells from having become diabetic, but you can live a life where your sugar never goes back into the danger zone. You can live a life where you're functional even as your body is dying of a degenerative disease such as cancer. So that would be my counter argument to that. Feel free to push back.
I agree that. Now I'm going to disagree, of course, that this requires any kind of supernatural being, but anybody who gets cured from diabetes can follow certain steps. If I remember correctly, reading in a documentary or seeing in a documentary of some sort, that there was before we knew what diabetes was, prisoners had figured out a way to manage diabetes before the medical field had, or some variation of
I think you're thinking about
some variation of that.
TEDx talk. Yeah.
That a tight-knit community who had every reason to survive together but nothing to gain was able to figure out a way that diabetes is in existence and we can overcome it by doing these things. And it's been a long time since I've seen whatever this documentary was. It's been at least 35 years, I'd say.
But if slavery
Probably on
is
PBS.
if
Precursors
slavery
to
is
nature.
is a cultural evil, and I'm using evil here in quotes. I don't
Yeah.
mean evil as in like the Satan. But if it's a cultural evil, if it's a necessary evil, like cancer, like diabetes, and you need rules for how to follow it, how to regulate it, how to limit it,
Yeah.
then you would need these kind of things. And it's not just and just to go to your point that it doesn't have to be divinely inspired. The Jewish people are not the only ones to come up with rules to regulate and limit the scope of slavery. Many cultures, because of how rampant and how ugly slavery could get, had to set up these rules. So I don't see why people like Dr. Kipp and people like Dr. Bowen have to downplay I don't want to say growth, but the gift of these rules in the Jewish culture. I mean, Jewish culture and then later Christian culture became the dominant world culture. If they didn't have these regulations, if they didn't have these ideas, we could be at a much darker place right now than we ended up being in.
Well, I don't know. There's an element to me versus you when it comes to whether the Bible exists because humans were making observations and using this as both a recording of history, recording of stories to tell, and as a supplemental education system for the next generation. Or there really was a God who was on a mountain, and a prophet named Moses really did walk up that mountain and garner knowledge to help the next generation. And here are the writings. Oops, I damaged them. Let's try to orally keep this then for a while before we write it down.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not being silly. It's going to sound silly, but I'm not being silly. Outside of Odysseus, outside of the Odyssey, I can't think of a single book, ancient book I'm talking about. I don't mean like modern fiction. I can't think of a single book that I've read of ancient literature where the precepts and narrative made me want to live it out as a real principled lifestyle. There are stories in the Bible that I can relate to in different ways. There's so many different characters and so many different circumstances written in so many different times that you can, at different times in your life, find someone to relate to and say, this is how they behave. This is the negative consequences. This is the positive. When I'm reading Julius Caesar, I'm not thinking about how to conquer the Gauls, who are my neighbors. When I'm reading Alexander the Great, I'm not thinking about how to become the emperor or the CEO of a company. But when I'm reading Job, I'm thinking about my personal suffering. When I'm reading Ruth, I'm thinking about how to survive in a situation. When I'm reading Esther, I'm thinking about how to be a good wife, a good woman in a situation. When I'm reading Matthew, I'm thinking about, wow, Jesus is going to get killed. When I'm reading John, I'm like, yeah, you want to be a good person, even if you know you're going to die. So I'm getting that from the Bible. I'm not getting that from, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Theogony, you name it. Like, I love these ancient books. They're part of who I am. They've informed my character, but I'm not getting those same principles that I'm getting from something like the Bible or even the Quran, if you want to go to a different religion.
I really don't have a good response for that. It does take me back to the last time we had a conversation that entailed that probably Genesis 4 was written before Genesis 1, for instance. And we use the Star Wars analogy. I would like to live as Luke Skywalker and be the pretentious little brat that you know,
But would you
is
try to
somehow
live
going to
out-
defeat the most powerful Sith in the whole wide world, the
Would you
universe,
try to
and the
live
galaxy.
that out though? That's what I'm asking though. Like in your personal life, would you like approach a car cell as if you're Yoda? You know what I'm saying? Like, would you actually try that? I'm not saying you can't. I'm just curious.
Yeah, but I don't think I would. But you definitely use that in the locker room banter.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, the Wolf of Wall Street comes to mind as we were quoting it earlier today in My Boss and I. We've got a green pea that's starting, the first green pea I've ever worked with at this dealership. Everybody's been experienced. This is a green pea coming in that's coming from the parts department. I already told him that I'm going to take him out for a 3 martini lunch and after he starts up in the front of the house. You know, this is you're going to see sales is a little bit like the Wolf of Wall Street. There are times where you go in and you close deals smashed off your ass. And I was working at a car dealership for about a month, and my boss took me out, got me smashed off my ass, made me work the rest of the day. Closed the deal, if I remember correctly. It was a cold December. I'm sorry, not December. January, February day.
I was telling the place that I work now. I was telling a coworker about the Jeffrey Gittimore solution to a bad sales week, which is you go out and get smashed, and you come in hungover, you have no sleep, and you're guaranteed to sell at least 1 car by the end of the day.
Yeah, there is an element of you have no anxiousness when you partied your ass off the night before.
Mm. If
If you're closing a deal and you're not anxious, there is something to that.
Mhm.
I have, in fact, as a single man, I remember not wanting to go out and several times thinking, you know, this is when I do my best work. Not being hungry is the best way to somehow feed yourself.
All right, I'm going to
Metaphorically.
go ahead and play the next
Okay.
section.
on the guy, right? And he's a debt slave. He voluntarily does this, you know, maybe under duress, but and then he agrees because he loves
This
his
is what
master.
Lisa
Like
was
that's sort of
talking
how
about.
that's usually put forward. But I think it pushes into the background the chattel slavery aspects of that passage.
So let's ask that question. Do you think that the slavery described in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, is chattel slavery? Does it actually qualify?
Only for the foreigners. It clearly, and I think they go into some more details, but clearly the widow who has no choice, clearly the child of that widow that has no choice but to survive off of whatever this accepted way of welfare.
Well, I was very surprised, and again, for those listening, I'm not trying to take the atheist side here. I was just very surprised that Joshua or Kip didn't try to hit on the fact that there are, and I know they're trying to stick to these laws. I get it. I get why they didn't do this, but there are passages in, like, let's say Judges or Joshua, where you have the killing of the adult women and the keeping of the virginal women, meaning the young women, so they can grow up to be marriageable. Yeah, so you're not doing the bad deed there, but you're literally sentencing them to that fate later on once they mature. So I don't know why they didn't. I mean, I do know why in the debate tactic, but on a personal level, I think that would have been, if you're going to get as emotional as Joshua got during this debate, I mean, I would have hit that, because that, I don't see how Gavin or Trent can defend that.
Well, I don't know if Kip and Josh wanted to rip their heads off. You know, I've seen a lot of Dr. Josh's. I've gotten his audiobook for his first video. I've met Dr. Josh in real life. at an atheist conference, and he's just here to share knowledge. I don't think he's here to do an Aaron Ross style matter of factness.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's doing it to share knowledge, and one of the things I do like about Dr. Josh is I think it's in Austin, but I'm not positive. He goes to this like weird atheist church every once in a while and does a presentation, and it's usually about slavery, on some form of slavery, as if it was a sermon. And I've used one of them in my videos. I don't think that was the intention. And do you think Trent Horn would show up? What he said when we didn't rewind it all the way, what he said there, like you clearly, you don't know what the emails contained prior to this agreement of let's do a live stream and talk about slavery. Apologist versus an atheist. Two atheist scholars.
And if I do plan on doing a review of this one, but I do think it was a little bit shitty of Dr. Bowen to kind of change the format right at the beginning. I understand why he did it, because he does deal. I'm waiting for it to drop. There we go. He does deal with crazy Christians all the time, so he was worried that Gavin and Trent might try to pull a fast one, so he tried to frame it all in the beginning. But I don't think that was necessary, at least with these two. I've never seen, don't get me wrong, Gavin and both Trent are prone to heavy apologetics and heavy rhetoric. That's not what I'm saying. But I've never seen them use dirty tactics. So I don't think that was necessary at the beginning for Dr. Josh to do. I
didn't catch the first 15 minutes, I don't think, of this. So
they were
I've definitely seen this.
They were going to
do
openings and then steel manning, and instead, Dr. Josh just kind of took over and did with his slides. He did framing, which is fine. But if they literally agreed not to do that, I did think that was a little bit uncalled for, just because it shows that he was expecting Gavin and Trent, I think, from the implication, to be unprofessional. And I've never seen either of these two men ever be unprofessional. You know what I mean? Even with Pearl, Trent tried to stay professional until he finally got fed up.
I don't know who Pearl is. Do I know who Pearl is?
She's a men's rights red pill person.
Yeah, I wouldn't be caught watching something like that.
I had a buddy who was deep into Tate during the end of the lockdown, and I was just like, dude, you got to get out of this, dude. That's not going to help you at all. All right, let's play this section.
Make a comment to kind of that will transition us to that as well, and this will just follow up on what you said, because actually, and maybe this will take us to Exodus 21, but this can be a concession to you, Josh, in that a lot of this is terminology. Okay, I would concede that there's ownership. So if that's what chattel slavery means, then yeah, we can use that term. I don't like doing that because I think that has associations for modern people that are very misleading.
I'm going to let this play a little bit.
It brings up other conceptions of other kinds of chattel slavery in which there's a perception of a lack of human equality between the slave and the master. Yeah. And that isn't a reflection of how it was in ancient Israel.
Before I let Trent go, I'm going to actually read what it's saying here, so that way we can actually talk about what they didn't talk about. Let's see. The one who struck the blow will not be held liable if the other can get up and walk around outside with a staff. However, the guilty party must pay the injured person for any loss of time and see that the victim is completely healed. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. If people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury. The offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is a serious injury, you are to take a life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for a burn, and wound for a wound. And then I'll finish here with this one. An owner who hits his male or female slave in the eye and destroys it must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. And an owner who knocks out the tooth of a male or female slave must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth.
Hmm.
Any comments?
No. I mean, if I remember correctly, the direction they go is this is softened in Matthew 19 when Jesus kind of repeats it and sells the turn the other cheek motif, if I remember correctly. And keep in mind, I didn't watch this. I only listened to it in an earbud.
I was listening to it as I was working out. So,
what I was making dinner and walking the dog and taking out garbage, and doing all the husbandly things, you know.
What I thought was
my slave master makes me do.
What I thought was interesting was that Joshua didn't hit harder on the fact that these are parallels to the Hammurabi stuff, since he had been hitting Hammurabi the entire time.
Yeah, I think it's common knowledge, and I think it's because Trent brings it up here and tries to soften it up as well as a comparison to it. If I remember correctly,
let's hear him do it.
For example, in ancient Rome, before the Reformation, the reforms of Emperor Antonius Pius, you could kill your own slave. It wasn't until the middle of the 2nd century after Christ that legislation was passed to prevent people from doing that. So Roman slavery was even like beyond more than some of the things you see in.
And I brought that up to Lisa. I wasn't trying to make a heavy point of it. I just, as someone who reads a ton of ancient literature, there's nothing in the Hebrew Bible, I'm going to call it that, that ever shocked me or sent me off. The only time I ever got offended by anything in the Bible was reading Paul, and that was the pseudo-Pauline letters. But
which one?
The rest of the Bible has never been offensive to me at all.
No, I kind of, I don't know. When I first read, I just remember being offended that God was incompetent in Genesis 1-11 over and over and over and over again.
How old were you when you read that?
Around the age of 10.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Around the age of 10, I was told this wonderful God was, amazing. And I remember at 10 getting to the end of Genesis 3 and going, okay, something's not right here. And I keep reading. I get to the middle of Genesis 4. Something's not right here. I get to the middle of Genesis 5. I'm like, okay, something's not right here. And like every single page I'm reading something and I'm like, something is not right here. This is not the amazing God that I was told about. This guy's I didn't say it then, but I see it now. This guy's just complete incompetent boob. God is a complete incompetent boob. If he was the most amazing thing, there just wouldn't be there wouldn't be any of the issues.
Well,
so
the theology that develops out of the Bible doesn't match the presentation of the first 5 to, I would say, even 12 books of Genesis. The God that we have through Christian theology, the dogma or the framework, as their friend Dan McClellan would say, is completely different than what you're getting from the polemics that's talking against the other cultures. So that doesn't bother me, and that was very clear to me even before I understood what the Bible was. I tried at 13 and I tried at 15 to read the Bible, and I couldn't do it. The giants is the one that messed me up the first time. Then the begots messed me up, and then I think it was the people living for thousands of years was the third one. And I was just like, I can't. Like, I just couldn't take it seriously.
I have no problem with those. That's funny.
Yeah?
I know. Yeah, but it's like how can you have a common phrase of thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven? If that's true, then there is zero possibility that Adam or Eve messes things up. There's zero possibility that Cain and Abel have a dispute that's worthy of murder.
Well, let me ask
if
you,
thy
you
will
were a
be done
Christian, if you were a
occurs-
Christian, would you think these stories were real? I mean, let me ask you that. If you were a Christian.
Well, when I was a Christian, I thought they were real. When I was 10 or 11 years old and listening to them from the pulpit, and the fire and brimstone was coming out every single Sunday, and you better get right with God because you never know when you're going to die in a car crash or so and so. You know, all I had to do was read the Sunday morning paper, and somebody died the night before that just made the news. You know?
I could never take these stories seriously until I was 33. I'm going to be really blunt. I could never take them seriously. The New Testament, I could. The New Testament is written. It's now that I understand literary development, it has a much more developed literary style. But the Old Testament, I just couldn't take it seriously.
So what's the absurd thing in the New Testament that you couldn't accept and now you accept?
Oh no,
as a matter of fact,
the New Testament, I've never had a problem with.
Uh-huh.
Like there's stuff that I know now about the New Testament that if I understood that before I understood literary development, I might have had a problem with. But there's nothing in the New Testament that I've ever rejected. Just the when I read the Bible for the 6th or 7th time, all the way through, like when I was reading it as a narrative, Paul did not sit right with me, specifically the pseudo-Pauline letters, because the misogyny, the homophobia, the anti-Semitism, I was like, this doesn't match anything I just read in the Gospels. You know, it doesn't match what Jesus was saying at all. I don't understand what this is. And that's what sent me on my journey back to the Catholic Church. I didn't know that's where I was going. You know, I could have ended up an atheist, but like I was just going to different pastors and different churches and different denominations, trying to find an answer. I went to atheist stuff. Most of the atheist stuff was bunk. It wasn't good. It wasn't good crap. It was stuff like religious and stuff like that. I was like, well, I know this is bullshit. I study history. So it was Paul is what drew me back into the church. It was that hurdle, that stumbling block. And then I found from other, we call them mature Christians, that it's the stumbling block that pulls people back in after their lapse. It's usually that's how that works.
Yeah. Well, the way I guess I have to agree with all of that. I think that there's plenty of absurd things in the New Testament that like a lot of the things that most atheists that I was familiar with had objections to. I never had objections to those things. Like the two donkeys or the colt and the donkey and stuff like that. Like I'm like, look, if you go back to the oldest document, take what it says there, throw it into a translator, and read it that way, you don't have this problem. To me, whatever that issue is, no matter if it was Septuagint issues or whatever it is, all you have to do is take a translator, put it into Hebrew, read it from the Hebrew into English, and voila, problem solved. It's ambiguous at best. What I have a problem is the opposite. Anything somebody tells me to use as evidence that there's witnesses, you throw that into the exact same scenario, everything's ambiguous, and there's no meat behind it. There's no teeth behind it. It's nothing.
Oh, it's
and
fake.
that's where I have the
you
problem.
Trust this, either you trust that the people really you're not even trusting the original source. You're trusting the people who are telling the story, that they're telling the story well or accurately. So if you can't trust that, then you don't have any faith there. If you don't have any faith there, you don't have any basis. It isn't until you get into theology that it becomes the resurrection is the basis of your faith. And that's Paul. Paul throws that in there. But until you get to that, when you're just looking at the narrative, either you trust the source or you don't. I've always trusted the source. I've always liked the story. I know that sounds cheap, but that's just when I got into the Bible, I couldn't read it the first, several times. Let's say the first 5 times I tried, I just couldn't do it. So I read everything else. So I read the Iliad, I read the Odyssey, I read Theogony, I read the Epic of Gilgamesh. I read all that stuff first, and then came back to the Bible around the age of 30 or 33. So I read all this other ancient material, and on top of that, I love comic books. So I love storytelling, I love narrative, and learning about writing and becoming a writer myself. When I read the Bible for the first time as an adult, I saw the narrative connections. I saw what each writer and what each author was doing, and how they were pulling back and how they were shooting forward, and how this wasn't really written at this time. This is before I knew any of the Bible history stuff. This is just like reading the narrative. I was like, oh, that's not there. That's coming from over here. Oh, that's not there. That's coming from over here. And seeing the narrative and literary tricks got me intrigued. And so I just kept reading it. Like I thought I was going to read the Bible and I was never going to read it again. I actually put it away for a year. And I was like, no, I want to see how they did that again. That was cool. And so then I read it again. And then the second time I read it, I was like, what translation am I reading? And then I got interested in translations. Then the third time I read it, I was like, you know what? What do other people think about this? So I got some commentaries, and I'm like, well, what commentary do I get? Well, this commentary is just apologetics. This commentary. So I went to an academic, resource, which was the Oxford Annotated. And I was like, ooh, this is good stuff. Like, this is interesting. Oh, hey, that theory that I had about what that was, that matched. And that theory about what I thought it was, oh, that matched. And then I got into deeper and deeper literary criticism of the Bible. And that I just started falling in love with the book. And then at some point, I got sick with diabetes, and I was like, well, let me read it in a different way. And that's when the faith and all that stuff kind of got in there, because I always believed in God. I didn't necessarily believe that what the Bible was saying was talking about the real God. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I don't know which religion is correct. I just kind of look at everything. So I had already done Taoism. I'd already read the Tao Te Ching, the Enuma Elish, the Rig Vedas, the Hindu scriptures, the Buddhist stuff. Like I read all the world religions, and then at the end of doing all of that, I came back to Christianity, and I was like, well, what's true? What's not true? So that's a very long journey that most people don't take. And mind you, I was doing translations. It's not like I know original languages, but
I without going off into weird rabbit holes.
I just said, sorry about that.
Yeah, I would. There's about 3 or 4 different conversations I could go from there, but none of them have to do with the slavery conversation. It says a deep discussion. They tried their hardest not to be debating.
Yeah.
So maybe it was to make the things flow. Who knows?
I kind of wish they were arguing a little bit more, but I think this is the best showing Trent's had. I thought the last showing with Jimmy was the best that Trent has done in about 2 years, but this is better than anything. I mean, this Trent was controlled. He wasn't relying on his apologetical tricks for the most part. He was actually talking about the facts. This is the best I've seen him do. Gavin, this is just where Gavin lives. Gavin, I've noticed Gavin's never right, but he's never wrong. And I'm like, that's an interesting debate tactic, just to kind of be like in the middle and just kind of like,
yeah, there's something slimy about Gavin, I must admit. I don't know about you, but something slimy about Gavin, and from the atheist perspective.
Well, the Catholics don't like him because they feel that he's lying, because he's introducing not counter narratives. Well, yeah, counter narratives to actual facts. And like he's going to the real source, and then he's having the source say exactly the opposite of what everyone says it says. And so a lot of Catholics are getting up. I'm not talking about like the Bible. I'm talking about like church fathers and histories and stuff like that. So Gavin's very good at flipping things. He's very much a philosopher. But I appreciate that, so it doesn't bother me. What about Dr. Kip or Josh? Do you have any critiques of their approach here? I know I've given light ones.
I feel like this isn't Kip's wheelhouse. Like his wheelhouse is the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he makes some commentary about some of the changes and stuff like that. Like to me, Dr. Kip is good at saying Daniel is the biggest turd you've ever seen, and here's how I can prove it. Like that is what Dr. Kip does. He's got a wealth of experience in doing some stuff in Sweden, if I remember correctly, and he's got some street cred on being on Nova, and a couple other documentaries about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
I kind of feel like Trent and Kip kind of had the same role, and Gavin and Josh were the two that were actually debating.
Huh. Interesting. But the thing is one of the times I paid attention to Gavin is when he was trying to do the sleight of hand. I felt he was trying to do a sleight of hand on, we just have different translations. Like, come on.
When he did that, for a second, I fell for it. I'm going to be honest. For a second, I fell for it, and I'm like, I mean, my thought was, yeah, Gavin could be stupid enough that he doesn't understand translation. And I'm like, no, he's not. But for 1 second, I just fell for it. I was just like,
yeah, I'm glad you said that. Yes, it's
okay.
A
little bit more.
Not normative legislation, right? I don't think they're a code that's trying to set out all the different possibilities of something that could happen. So anyway, but yes, I agree with you that there isn't something like that.
Because in Law of Hammurabi 116, we have the slave has died because of what the distrainer has done. So to remedy the harm that was caused, 1/3 a mina of gold has to be given to the merchant or to whoever. Even though I'd still say this third party makes it different. So what's interesting here, we're looking at there usually in law there's a harm. How do you give restitution for the harm? And here, but the only harm that's considered is that if the slave dies because of something somebody did, then money has to be given to make up for that fact. But the Old Testament seems unique in that because the slave has been seriously injured, the restitution there doesn't seem to have anything to do with the master. It seems to, the only explanation would have to be that it's something to do with the slave, which we.
Do you think that's correct?
I think they kind of go back and forth, like, and I can't, if I remember correctly, I can't tell if they get confused about which reference and parallel they're making to which verse and Hammurabi, or if they've conflated and tried to muddy the waters, basically to save face.
Let me ask, do you think that
reading body language with Trent itching his nose there, like, to me that's a tell that something isn't setting right with him saying what he's just said.
Well, I noticed that and I use this term because I've been reviewing debates, and that's what actually has been growing my channel. I've been getting 1,000 to 2,000 views on these little debate reviews, and I've been calling it tactics. That Trent and Jimmy will both use tactics over what their statement. So they'll have an opening statement that they agree with, and they'll have a closing statement, but they'll use tactics that don't necessarily agree with what they're claiming, but it torpedoes the argument of the opposing side. And on one hand, obviously, if the tactic works, you use it. You know what I mean? You're trying to win a debate. On the other hand, it's really slimy. Jimmy Akin will do even worse. He'll get you on a train of thought, and then after you make a claim, he'll then, so with his be consistent, then you got to agree with this. So now you just agreed with the Pope. And it's like, That's not what he said. You know, that's not what he said. Like, what are you doing?
Mhm.
With Trent, it's more like this. Although I didn't see him being slimy in this one at all. I didn't see him using bad tactics. I think everything that he did was fair game. But I did notice a few times that he did use debate tactics that didn't even help his argument. It just simply countered the point that Kip or Josh made.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be that. Um,
And
I
I
don't
think
know.
I think Trent came in here for a debate. I don't think he came in here for this.
Okay.
Honestly, that's just my honest opinion. But what do I know? I can't read minds.
It was a great deep discussion with quotes then.
At the end of my last response to you, we can get into this and do the question of extent. The claim on the table is significant improvements. Okay, so then we can double click on the word significant and unpack that and see, well, how
See, that's all
significant is it?
apologetics
Just
right
a
there.
little significant, and we can kind of weigh
Uh-huh.
the scales on the pros and cons. The two that I've put forward, Deuteronomy 23, Exodus 21, they're very significant because of the implications of what's at stake. I agree with what I'm reading, and you guys are Old Testament scholars, I'm not. But what I'm reading in the Old Testament scholarship is a pretty significant recognition that it is a big deal to have a law that says the master cannot physically abuse the slave.
Before we get into that, do you think
Huh.
his use of playing dumb here or playing ignorant is dishonesty, or do you think that that's perfectly acceptable? In
I mean,
in an approach, because
um,
clearly he knows.
I don't make any money being an atheist and knowing the Bible as well as I do.
Mhm.
I could definitely shepherd a flock, and start, with everything I know, I would make a hell of a lot more money training to be an apologist. I could be better than Daniel on Twitter. I could be better than Wendell on Twitter if I really wanted to be.
I'll be honest. There are days that when I'm not hitting the numbers that I want to hit on my topic videos, I'm only getting 25 views on a fucking video, that I'm like, I could just be the religious hippie. I don't know if you know who this chick is, but I could just say all the right things and consent to everything the church says, and I'll have 1,000 views by the end of the week. But I don't
Just
want
say
to
a couple
do
of
that.
the buzzwords,
Yeah.
quote a couple scriptures, say a couple of the buzzwords,
Let's all say the rosary together, guys. Come on.
and
Remember,
yeah,
the Pope said something against our standards. The Pope is being a bad guy. We have to pray for him that he understands what the true meaning of the church is. And I'm like, fuck you guys, okay? The Pope's our boss. If you don't like him, get out of the religion. Like, I know that's the wrong thing to say, but that's who I am. I'm like, no, if you're going to be a Catholic, that's our guy. Run with him. Anyway,
that's why you become a Protestant.
I love the Pope. I'm it's so weird that in the current zeitgeist of the Catholic Church, the people who are not well liked are the people who like the Pope, and the people who are well liked are the schismatics who are like, oh, the Pope is saying all this stuff of to gay people, and I'm just like, just shut the fuck up. Just look, the Pope's never going to go against the Catholic Church. He is the Pope. Chill out. Stop being dramatic. I get it. You got views. You want to make money, but all you're doing is causing scandal in the Catholic Church. Back off. But my channels aren't popular, not popular yet anyway. And their channels are, they start like a month ago and now they're at, 1 million freaking views of video. All you got to do is say the right thing. I can't do it. I can't be dishonest. I really wish I could, but I just can't. I don't know why.
And so the nature of, so I guess to answer your question, it comes down to the nature of the uniqueness, and then we're looking at it in both directions.
I'd also say challenging ones.
Okay. Were you gonna say something? Yeah. Let me go up to over here.
You guys singling out 26 and 27
Sure.
and doing this comparison, right?
I kind of felt
the
like
3 years
that
is
was
supposed out.
Josh's
Uh,
version of standing
Law
up
of
for himself
Hammurabi
and calling out their
117.
bullshit.
Uh, so the reason that I'm singling out Law of Hammurabi 117 with the 3 years as opposed to 6 is because it's in response to you guys singling out 26 and 27
Sure.
and doing this comparison, right?
Fair enough.
If you're asking me, I say, I mean, look, I'm with. Let me read a very short quote here by Bernard Jackson on this topic. There is, I think, a salutary lesson to be learned from this comparison, and it's the one that we were just talking about. It is all too easy to allow apologetics to enter into the comparison of biblical with ancient Near Eastern law. Apologetics which take the form of showing the moral superiority of the biblical to the non-biblical collections. I do not, in this case, attribute such motivation to the claim. Sorry, he's talking about that there. But even if we do take the Exodus provisions as referring to slavery in general, the comparison does not lead in a single direction. Biblical law, making these assumptions, may give a protection to the permanent slave, which is absent in the ancient Near Eastern collections. But conversely, the protection from maltreatment according to the debt slave is greater in Hammurabi than it is in the Bible. The
What's
latter
Gavin looking
comparison
at, you think?
You know, Gavin makes faces, and I don't know if I cannot tell if he's pretending to think or he's actually thinking.
Yeah,
Trent
I can't
is
tell
bored
either.
off of his fucking mind. Trent is like, I don't give a fuck. I know exactly what I'm going to say. Just finish.
Yeah.
Like Trent and Jimmy.
Gavin's body language and his where he's at right now, and just reverse it for the last 20 seconds and watch his body language and his eyes.
Making these assumptions may give a protection to the permanent slave, which is absent in the ancient Near Eastern collections. But conversely, the protection from maltreatment according to the debt slave is greater in Hammurabi than it is in the Bible. The latter comparison, we may note, is consistent with the shorter maximum period of service for the debt slave, which Hammurabi sets at 3 years as opposed to the biblical 6. So, like, the reason that...
And I just love Trent. Trent's like, I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to win. It doesn't matter.
Because I only heard this part of it. I was walking the dog when this was going on. I think.
I just think it's sad. And I don't mean this in a bad way. I really do appreciate when it comes to apologetics, is, you know, I do anti-apologetics. I do appreciate what Gavin and Trent bring to apologetics. But Kip and Josh are being so honest and so real, and Gavin and Trent are just tactically winning. And it's like, I don't care about the tactics. I don't care about you being the winner at the end of the debate. Talk about the facts. Get into it. Like, mix it up. But they're both so good at winning that they both kind of forget the actual facts. I did a video calling out Joe Heschmeyer on this. Joe Heschmeyer had a great source from the Jewish Encyclopedia that says that Jews believe in that a specific Jewish writer believes in purgatory, and that this is the Jewish view. Well, I happen to have read that Jewish writer, and I'm like, this is bullshit. I've read that guy. I know for a fact that he does not believe in purgatory. And so I made this video where I just simply read the source. Like, I didn't read the little sentence. I read the entire paragraph, and it just flips the entire thing on its head. And it's like, they're talking about hell, and they're talking about a temporary hell. That's what they're defining. They're not defining purgatory. And it's like, I get it. You want to win the debate. You want to do the apologetics thing. But at some point, it's dishonesty. At some point, you are a car salesman. You know what I mean? And maybe it's because I've been a car salesman for so long that I'm like, I just can't stand it when they're doing it to religion. You know what I mean? Where I'm just like, don't tell me that you have the best warranty in the United States. Everyone says that. I don't care. Let me fucking drive the car. You know what I mean? Like, let me see how this actually functions.
Sounds like you're going to be a great atheist someday. Alpha, you're right. You're right on your way. If the null hypothesis is in your blood, you cannot deny it.
If Logic and what was the other? There's another big atheist that used to email me. if neither of them could get me there, I don't see it happening.
Logic.
What Jackson would say, I think,
is Logic.
Disagreements and
He's the guy
Logic's
who
the one
wears,
that wears the 3D glasses.
yeah,
Yeah.
and his he emailed me a few times, but his wife is the one who did the response videos to me. I actually
Hmm.
missed their responses. Like, since I've come back to doing it more active, I'm surprised they haven't like tried to tear down any of my stuff. So
I don't watch Logic very often. Like his stuff will show up on my homepage
Hmm.
as a suggestion fairly regularly, but I've never subscribed to him. I don't know. I find his stuff entertaining more than substantive, so I don't really go for.
I wanna.
I have
I'm
plenty
torn-
of snark. I don't need his.
I'm torn between Rumble and TikTok as the place that I need to start sharing my shorter views and videos. I just don't know.
Is Rumble what's Rumble again?
Rumble's the one where atheism is unstoppable went to. He went to Rumble.
Oh,
It's
I
the free speech
didn't know.
platform.
Why did he go there? I
He
know
got-
he's not
he got
on.
He got in trouble for either racism or for anti-Semitism, and so instead of fighting YouTube, he just jumped ship to a different platform.
I did love his Fiddler on the Roof. I know it uses Fiddler on the Roof music and does a collage of all the Jewish atheists there are.
What I enjoyed about him was his video
remember.
editing. I know that sounds weird,
Yeah,
like,
it was
he's
good.
like, but his video editing was just amazing. And then the
Yeah.
way he would hit the one-liners, the video that I did in response to the one that nuked my channel, the video response that I did to Brian Holdsworth, I did modeled after one of Atheism is Unstoppable's videos, and I used the exact same beats. And freaking Brian Holdsworth was freaking horrified. He's like, what kind of Christian talks like this? And I'm like, you're being a dick and saying that my ancestors who fucking died are okay and justified. Like, no, fuck you. So yeah, I wasn't playing nice that day, and I used Atheist Unstoppable's method, cutting method, and the beats that he would use for when he would hit the insults. And yeah, the Christian guys did not like that.
and drilling into where the disagreements lie, and then the conversation.
Within
Sure.
its original context, and so much of what's happening there just is I would say that the focus on human dignity as a feature in that passage is missing the point.
BS Tux has said that he would like to purchase you for 3/4 of a quarter. Are you down?
Or just getting the original context wrong, which is fine because this is how texts work, right? Texts aren't static and they don't stay in the same place. They are read and reread and recontextualized over time.
How do you feel about that opinion from Kip? Do you think that's correct, or do you think that original meaning should play a bigger part in these arguments?
Well, I think it's similar to your statement on your familiarity with New Testament not being necessarily chronological, not necessarily always being pseudepigraphically, and by the actual author, it could be the recollection of that author, or it could be a some variation of their dissertation, or it could be that they wanted to get their ideas out into the world and just say that Paul said this, wrote this, then they can get their ideal out into the world just the same. So I think what he's doing is kind of doing an offshoot of what you were talking about, and how these fingers all clasped together and become a unified message. I think that's what he's saying, but in so many words.
He he talked against univocal. I can never say that word, univocality, for a good portion, but he did end up, backtracking a little bit and admitting that when we're interpreting it, we are interpreting it through this collective idea, but that it does change over time. So the way we understood it in Victorian England, the way we understood it, 30 years ago, is different than we understand it today. I think that's fine, but when I first read the Bible all the way through with an understanding of what it was, I read it as individual texts. When the Bible had the greatest impact on me is the last 3 times I read it, when I read it as a single text. Not because I thought that it was a single text, but just as in reading the narrative and having it develop from beginning to end, including all the apocryphal works, just had this power. Like, when you understand what Jewish culture means by Son of Man, and when you understand how the Maccabees handled people who said the opposite, and then you see Jesus come in, and the very first thing he says is the Son of Man's coming. I mean, you're just like, whoa, he's going to get killed. Like, you have a setup, you have a literary setup of exactly, you're like, okay, so if you go back to Psalms, if you go back to Deuteronomy, you know exactly how this story is going to play out. You don't get that when you're reading Matthew by itself, or when you're reading the Gospels by itself. When you have this bigger picture, you have these great literary games. And to me, and again, maybe this is sacrilegious, I don't know, it reminds me of really good comic books when they put references back to a comic book from like the 80s. It's like, if you go back to X-Men issue 80, you will see this happen. And like, here's this payoff by a different author on a different run of the same character, but it's there. And you can see the setup, you can see the build up, and you can see the payoff from different authors doing it. And I'm just like, that's amazing. That's a cool trick, to be able to keep a narrative together and have people drawing back and drawing forward and hoping that someone else picks up the ball. Like, that's cool. And the Bible does that a lot. And I don't see why that has to be offensive to so many Protestants. Catholics, for the most part, unless they're rad trads, acknowledge that the Bible does this. Popes acknowledge that the Bible does this. I don't know why it has to be offensive. And I feel like Gavin's on the cusp of becoming Orthodox. I don't think he'll ever become Catholic, because I don't think he likes the Pope at all. But he's acknowledging so much of this Catholic understanding of the Church Father understanding, really, of how the Bible came together, that eventually he can't hold to Protestant ideals of sola scriptura, not if he's going to be consistent with what he understands.
I don't know. Makes, to me, what you're saying, at some point you have to bring to the table that there's a legitimate Jesus.
Yeah.
No matter how you slice it. And I don't see that. If these things are a good, cool narrative, it goes back to my Star Wars analogy. Rogue One is an excellent movie. It's the only one that Disney's made that's been an excellent movie. Disney's made some good stuff, but none of them have been excellent. Mandalorian season 1 and 2 has been excellent. Season 3 was okay. Boba Fett was Andor. I really loved Andor. I've heard the complaints of slow moving, but I actually enjoy the slow moving aspect of it. I don't know if I'm going to continue watching, because the subscription I have now has commercials. I don't think I could watch them with commercials. So piss off.
B.S. Lewis wants to know if he does that from the if he does what I do with the Bible, does that make him personally inspired? It's a religious question, so I'll let you answer that one as the Christian on the dais, Tux.
Yeah. Well, B.S., we all are looking for our pound of flesh. All of us. And some of us are looking for a pound of poo. And you're just the guy I was looking for.
So just to let you know,
that's gonna be clipped. That's gonna be fucking clipped in a short.
Just so that you know, BS, I am currently rereading the Bible, but I'm now doing it with Church Father commentary, which is taking much longer. So my 9th read of the Bible is commentary read, and it's going to take the whole freaking year. I'm still doing the preamble stuff. I just got done with the second apologetical work ever done by Christianity. So I did Origin. I did all of Origin stuff, and now I'm doing Tertullian. I just got done with Tertullian Heresies, which it's a good book, but it's so short and it's very basic.
What did you think about Origin?
I love him.
It's been a long time since I read Origin, but
so don't get me wrong. I understand why he's considered a heretic. You can't really have you can't have not resurrection. What's the word? Where you reincarnate. You can't have reincarnation in Christianity. It just doesn't fit. But his opinions on the Bible, like as a narrative and as literary tricks, is everything that I believe. Like I had already believed it, and then seeing him clarify how these things work, seeing him point out where these tricks are being made, like it's undeniable. So I know that Bishop Barron, a Catholic bishop, loves Origin, but people like Trent and a few other like Tyler Marshall, they hate him. But I if there's a way to redeem Origin, I would love to see him be a saint one day. I just don't think that's going to happen. Tertullian, unfortunately, cannot ever be a saint because he actually left the faith. With Origin died, and then like 100 years later, a group of heretics used his name for their heresy, and that's why he was like seen as a bad guy. But that's not technically him making those mistakes. That's someone using his name. So I think he's redeemable. I just don't know if that'll ever happen. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to about 15, and then we'll do 2 more skips, and then we can call it a night. That's good with you?
Yeah.
And we could talk about that more, but did that make sense?
I have a question about that, if I may. So I think I understand what you're proposing, and I think always the question for
Nice, BS.
a
Very nice.
proposal is, what best explains the text. Now, when I'm looking at this text, the final little addition of the thread throughout seems to be reflecting compassion for this runaway foreign servant, to me, and I see that in several ways, but especially with the final little phrase. I think in your translation it said, "You shall not oppress him." My translation's a little bit different from that. I think it says, "You shall do him no wrong." But
is Gavin playing stupid the greatest thing of all time, or is, as the atheist watching, do you hate it? Because as me, I thought it was cute. I thought it was a cute, stupid thing to say to the scholars, like, "Look, you're so much smarter than me," when clearly he doesn't think that.
Yeah. I don't know if he's, because he was probably sending this to his audience just the same. I don't think it was just on Myth Vision. I think the main host channel was it Myth Vision?
There
Or was it Dr.
Vision,
Kip?
and then Digital Hammurabi, and then Kip, and then Gavin had one. I think
no,
the
I
only
don't
one who didn't have
subscribe
one
to-
was Trent.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to Gavin or Trent Horn, so I don't even know. I mean, I it's used a lot in both directions, and like I said, with the example I used on the colt and the donkey translation, just throw it from Greek to Hebrew and then to English and see what happens. And if it's still there, then there's a problem.
Well, let me
type of
ask you
thing.
this. I mean, let's go old school anti-theism on YouTube. Hannah and Jake, when they did their read through of the Bible, and they were acting like they didn't understand basic literary concepts that they clearly understand from watching movies and reading comic books, but they pretended like they didn't understand it when it was in the Bible. Do you think that's fair criticism, or do you think that's just a really cheap trick?
Honestly, I don't even know who Hannah and Jake are. I don't even know.
They are the first major atheist outside of TJ Kirk on YouTube. They did a skeptic reading of the Bible where they actually went through the entire Bible. I don't remember what Hannah's name was originally. She was originally a guy, and then at some point during, I think, COVID, she transitioned over, and then their channel dropped off after COVID. I don't know if they finished reading the Bible or if they just stopped. But it's a long running series. It's like maybe a 10-year running series. Them and Glassland Jen and a few other old school atheists.
Lost on Me.
Bible Reloaded. There we go. That's what it was called. There you go.
Bible Reloaded. That sounds somewhat familiar.
All right, let's see. Let's play 2 more and then we'll call it. Okay.
Just check.
I don't know. I
No,
don't
it's
even know
called
what I'm gonna pick.
Just Check.
I'm just gonna right there.
Bible Reloaded.
Let's see what this is. and then do one more.
Developments. These foreign slaves don't get that. And so I think that's probably an important point to sort of emphasize, because we didn't get there. So yeah, I said I'd be short, so there I was. That was short.
And I think what I would say is that slavery was a universal human institution in a time before, essentially before reliable forms of credit could be invented. And it's no coincidence, reliable forms of credit and reliable forms of social control and crime deterrence. So prisons, things like that. So it's no coincidence. Every society, Asia, the Americas before the arrival of Columbus, Africa, everyone had some form of slavery to provide social credit and social control to maintain social stability. And so that is something to see against the backdrop of that. We see, I would say from our perspective, we do see very important key elements of slavery in the Old Testament being superior to other societies in virtue of the fact that the Israelites recognize their own unique history of being slaves in Egypt and of how God dealt with them and they should deal with others. And I think
So I have 3 objections to what Gavin's saying. I'm on Gavin's side again, but Trent's side again. But I have 3 objections here. Number 1 is that the Israelites might not have actually been slaves in Egypt. So you're just pulling a presupposition or a probable. And then you have the second problem, which is this argument he himself would reject. If you said, well, every culture has murderers, or every culture has had polygamy, or every culture has polyamory. What's wrong with it now? Every culture has had homosexuality. And he would just reject that argument completely, but he's using it here. The third issue here is that I think everyone's kind of like done, and Josh is just pouring his heart out, and Trent's just gonna win. And he's like, look, I know exactly how to counter this. I have 3 master's degrees. You have a doctorate. I'm smarter than you. Here we go. I'm gonna put my dick on the table, and you're done. And I just don't think that was fair to Josh, because I understand that I agree with Trent Horn, and I understand that it doesn't matter if the Bible endorsed or didn't endorse slavery. If Jesus rose from the dead and Jesus is God and God is real, the Bible could say almost anything. If the Bible is telling the correct story of God, then it's our best source for that history. And if it's not telling the correct story of God, we still have the church and tradition to rely upon as Catholics. So we're not even completely in on this fight. Gavin, on the other hand, is completely committed to this fight. If Josh or Kip can show that the Bible is morally corrupt, if they can show that there's another source or a better source of information or history than the Bible, Gavin's whole worldview and the people who follow him are screwed. Dr. Kip, I don't know what his motivation is. And Josh, just really has a problem with ancient slavery for some particular reason. I don't know. But I just feel like between Josh's emotional appeal, Trent Horn's rhetorical tactics, Gavin playing stupid, it just feels like it kind of started to fall apart at the end, because they had such a deep and rich and great conversation. I think one of the best conversations I've ever heard on this topic. To have Trent fall back into apologetics at the very end seemed unnecessary, considering everyone here is kind of like peaceful and doing good with each other. That's my only critique of Trent, is that like I said, this is the best he's ever done on any of these debates. I want to see this Trent more, but I don't think he had to, beat the shit out of Josh intellectually at the very end. I don't think that was necessary, especially because it's tactics he himself wouldn't accept on stuff that Catholics believe.
Yeah.
Or maybe
I
I'm wrong.
don't know. I only own the evangelical, the Church of Christ, biblical inerrancy view on this, but is there a flow chart in which the Catholics have that it's acceptable to have slavery and have a classification of objective morality come from God and only God when you have essentially a disaster of human treatment in one form or another, either due to war, either due to a subhuman treatment instead of prison, widows and their children just trying to survive, any of these things. Is there a Catholic flowchart that can include all these things with a nice tidy bow and still say, well, we got it from God and that means it's good?
So what we have is called papal statements, and we have an understanding of the ecumenical councils that demonstrate the development of doctrine both pre-Christianity and during Christianity, during Christendom. So we do technically have that flowchart, but it's just not written down in a simple thing. It just gets reinterpreted over and over again. So you have the Council of Trent, you have Vatican II, you have whatever's coming next, and then you have these papal statements that tell Catholics, okay, it's okay for us to now publicly acknowledge this thing that we always known is true and has been in our church father tradition from the beginning. We have Origen as a church father. We have John Christensen. We have Jerome. We have Augustine. We have Augustus. We have not Augustus. I'm sorry, Aquinas. So we have all this stuff already analyzed. We're just not saying it to the public because it'll piss off the Protestants or whatever. Thomas, yes, Thomas, Jimmy does have a YouTube channel. Can you promote it before the end of the thing?
Okay.
But you have these doctrinal developments that really are not developments, and this is what Protestants don't get about Catholics. So what Jimmy Akin is doing with this bizarre Protestant outreach, he's not technically inventing something new. He's taking something that some church fathers have said, and he's now Protestant washing their statements to try to get the Protestants to come over. And really it takes the Pope to say, hey, don't make that argument anymore, or hey, this argument's now allowable. And it's not as if we haven't had these tools in our toolbox the entire time. It's just the Pope saying what we're allowed to say publicly and what we're not. So if I wanted to say something specific and the Pope said you can't say it, I can't make that argument. And I think I've been in 2 debates with BS where he's put me in a position where it's literally something the Pope says that I can't say. So I can't say it. I just have to go, and it's, for a Catholic, it's really difficult because if you say this one thing, you can be labeled a heretic. You can be kicked out of the church. It's very authoritative. It's very about obedience. Trent is doing that game, and he's the only one in this panel who's doing that game, and I appreciate it. But I don't think it was necessary at the end to play that game with Josh, because I think Josh has been completely honest the entire time. I think he's honestly trying to get the Christians to say, hey, there's ugly slavery in the Bible that looks bad. And the Christians are saying, like, nah, not really. Like there's these other factors. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To me, it's the a wholesale acceptance, and for the atheist, it's the selling of this is probably human origin and it didn't come from God. And it should be an impossibility for you to accept that if Trent's going to bring up that there's a credit system that's available that prevents slavery a welfare system that could be set up instead of slavery, that an amazing being couldn't have orchestrated it, even in times when there wasn't prisons built and there weren't, a federal mint making fake money the way we make fake money. Like it just seems like an amazing being would be able to do that, but somewhere around 15th to 500 BC, then you have men, quote unquote men, doing the best they can, making it up as they go. Since we're controlling things, we're going to go ahead and take dominion away from everybody but us.
Let me ask.
that
Let's pretend you're in a debate with Trent Horn, and he's holding on to a fact that he could have presented in the beginning, that you could have debated the entire time, and he waits until the end to knock you out with this fact that you've been asking for. You've been asking the entire debate, hey, can you present this argument? And he presents it at the end when you can't respond or when there's no time to respond. Would you feel, as the debater, as someone who is good at words, who's good at convincing people, that this is a fair tactic? Like, hey, he took his shot and he landed it. I'm done. It's fine. Or do you feel that taints this great discussion we had for, 2 hours and 35 minutes? What do you think?
Well, I my intellect and my quick knowledge base is not going to be on a same level. You might as well throw me into a professor. Those chalkboards that are just filled with equations and just what looks like gibberish? I'm pretty sure Trent Horn could make me look like I'm standing in front of that board and asking me, so what's the solution? And he could put me in the situation where I'm looking at nothing but gibberish and I have no idea, because that's the skill level that Trent Horn and the knowledge level that Trent Horn has about Catholicism apologetics. But in this, if he's going to present the argument, that you got to remember he's defending, and I'm going to take his lunch money and kick his ass. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Your God's amazing, remember? You're better than God making this closing argument. Thank you. I appreciate it for you admitting that you're better than God and coming up with a better solution, coming down from Sinai instead. I don't know if that answers the question, but I feel like I could respond to that. Granted, this isn't a real debate because there's two other people there and they're not really doing a tag team debate. But I would be able to say, hey, I think that's a great idea. Why didn't God think of it in Sinai?
So his answer would be progressive development. And even Dr. Josh did make this argument at one point, which was to kind of keep Trent from attacking. He said, look, I get it. In the New Testament, Paul says that you have to be ready for meat. And if you're not ready for meat, you got to stay on the milk until you're ready. And that's the argument. The argument is progressive revelation. The Jewish people were not ready for the full revelation. And so you have to start off with the milk until you can get to the meat. And the meat is Christ. And I mean, that's the argument. I always think it's insulting to Jewish people that you're comparing them to babies, but whatever.
One of my go-tos for the reason I think the way I do is there's a story in the Midrash about Abraham and his dad's idol shop. Have you ever encountered it?
I don't remember it right now. I might have, but I don't remember it right now.
To me, this is just like we were talking about. Genesis 4 was probably written before Genesis 1. The Midrash was definitely written long after, but I think the story itself about Abraham was probably floated long time ago in some form or fashion, but it to me is an insight on how Abraham becomes the creator of idols no longer being statues, trinkets, and statuettes that you carry around. That this story is kind of the way to connect the dots between those statues and trinkets and the psychological effect that somebody figured out those statues and trinkets have, and make it an invisible being that is Abraham's God. That is the God that is coming down Sinai. And to me, what you said, if you remove everything in this world, if you say we are human, we're just trying to make our ways through this world, and somebody's creating the mechanism for us to best get through this world, and it just so happens to be a guy named Yahweh or Adonai or Hashem or Elohim or some variation of those. Well, I think the same effects of those statues and those trinkets have now been made and put into a verbal story. A literary story from verbal communications in the past. That's it. Whether I'm right or wrong, it does not matter. The psychological effects are there, whether we like it or not. The psychological effects have helped us through who knows how many wars, famines, slaveries, enslavements across the universe. You know, if there is on earth as it is in heaven, for instance. So I'm against this coming from Trent Horn and Gavin's God, because I think it came from humans. But Catholicism and Paul's Christianity and whatever Hebrew organization of many of these stories to paper or skins, all of it was human reconciliation or creation of our stories. And you don't need that God. Even if there is one, you don't need that God for any of this.
So just to counter, and I think this would be a good place to close, is that on the Protestant framework, I think your argument works. If I was a Protestant, I probably would have been an atheist a long time ago, because there's an either or mentality. It's either all God or it's nothing. With Catholics, we have a both and mentality. It's all God and all man. You are divine and you are human. You are good in nature, like the Pope said, and you are of a fallen nature. We're both and that gets us out of a lot of intellectual traps. It is a trick. I don't deny it's a trick, but it gets us out of a lot of intellectual, what he calls moral hazardly ground. It gets us out of it, and it keeps us on the moral path. And unfortunately, when Catholics don't understand that we're both and, they become atheist. They just do. You can't understand all the facts and hold on to the faith if you have to have the faith be entirely God alone. You have to allow for the errors and for the anachronisms and the mistakes, and you have to allow for the church fathers to disagree. And if you don't have the mental capacity to have those paradoxes in your head, you just can't hold on to your faith. Not a mature faith, anyway. And so, yeah, you either become a rad trad or you simply lose your faith. For people like Trent Horn, Jimmy Akin, like myself, not that I'm on their level, but just for people like us, we have all the facts before us. We understand everything that Dr. Joshua Bowen says. I'm reading Dr. John Barton. I'm reading all the big books about Bible criticism. I've been reading them for the last 20 years. This is what I've been doing with my life, and I haven't lost my faith. But it's because I'm holding two different ideas in my mind at the same time and saying, yes, this is true, but this is also true. And I think if I ever lost that ability, that would be where my faith would be in crisis. As long as I have that ability, it's never going to be a problem. And it's never going to be a problem for Trent. I just worry that Trent and Jimmy and all these Catholic, 90 WTN, Catholic answer guys, because they're so trained up on apologetics, they're losing the plot. They're more interested in winning than in truth. And eventually they're going to fall into the same trap that Protestantism is now currently in, which is you're getting called out on your bullshit and you no longer have a good answer. And that's my final thought.
I think it's good. That's good enough.
All right.
I see there's some activity in the thing. Yes, I have a channel. It's at Jimmy Tux TV is my main channel. And I had my thing on full screen, so I didn't read some of this.
You have
Yes, I do. I do want eggplants on my lips.
real quick. Let's finish the. Let's kind of summarize. What do you think the debate was really about? Who do you think won the debate, and what's your
This
opinion on it?
was-
And then I'll give mine.
This was not a debate. This was a deep discussion. Deep discussion. It needed strippers and illegal narcotics. And that would have made it probably much, much better. So, what did I think about it? I think I think that I don't know. Curious about the standing the test of time, because I will say this. One of my first acts after deciding I was no longer going to be in the Christian camp and trending towards atheism is I went to see a debate up in Milwaukee between Bart Ehrman and Price. And of course, I was on Bart Ehrman's side. Jesus existed. Jesus existed. It's that simple. And even though I definitely have always enjoyed Bart Ehrman stuff, every time I rewatch that debate, which I do about every other year, I'd say, it is profound to me how much Robert Price's points, even though he got creamed in the debate, have stood the test of time. So whoever you watched this on and were rooting for and rooting against, I would be curious that this will have the same effect. If you're a Catholic or an evangelical and you watch this 2 years from now, my guess is you're going to see more and more of Dr. Kip and Dr. Josh's points, even if you don't agree with them. So I would say that's what this is this is something that'll stand the test of time on the atheist side, is my best guess. Could be wrong.
So let me go ahead and give my summary. I think this debate was more about the approach to understanding slavery than whether or not there was slavery in the Bible, which is what Dr. Joshua Bowen wanted. He wanted Gavin and Trent to admit that there is ugly versions of slavery that is endorsed by the Bible, and they never got there. I am grateful that Dr. Kip and Derek were a part of this, but I don't think they were really necessary. I think Gavin and Trent did do a good team, did do a good job of defending. I do think if you want to make it a debate, sure, the Christians won. Do I think that this victory will stand the test of time? No, because they were using pop and junk apologetics. For the most part, luckily, neither Gavin or Trent fell into that trap over and over again. So there was real honest exchange. I think this is the best exchange I've ever heard on this, including exchanges I've had with other people. I think this is the best. I think this is the best Trent has done in any debate. I think Gavin is a little bit of a shyster, but I still love him, and I'm never going to stop watching his stuff until he finally pisses me off. I wish Dr. Bowen the best, but I think he's fighting a losing battle because we've all read the Bible. If you're watching this debate, if you're one of the 4 people still watching this right now, we've all read the Bible. We know what it says. This is not an academic question for us. We know there's slavery in the Bible, and still we have people trying to say it's not there. So I don't see this as being productive on the atheist side. I disagree with Jimmy there. I do think this conversation is important and it's going to stand the test of time. And I don't think the apologetics is going to stand the test of time at all. I think it's going to be, there'll be different arguments to oppose Dr. Josh from this video. Like, people will learn tactics from this. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish this was just the kind of engagement where people will understand that the Bible is more nuanced and reflects a culture that we're no longer in, and that's fine. I wish that that was the case, but I don't think that's going to be the case. I think people are going to use this on all sides to make better arguments against the other side. And that's my final thought. We good?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Bow tie bless.
I'm gonna. He's praying for Israel and his Jewish family, of course. All right. Real quickly, I do have a Patreon. I do have merch in my Streamlabs, and I did properly set up my PayPal, so you guys can tip that way. I appreciate your support. My channel is going to be changing soon as I got promoted at work. I'm still going to be doing nightly streams, but they might turn into hour-long streams like I did this week, and then do a really long chunk live stream on a Sunday. I might start pulling back on the topic videos just because nobody's really watching those. They're really watching debates, so I might be doing debate reviews going forward and doing topic nights like tonight. I appreciate Tux coming on. I appreciate Lisa coming on. Everybody who was in the chat. I know I had some larger views and then some drop views, like we were going cycling through. I appreciate all of you. Remember, God forgives you. God loves you. I love you, and I appreciate you. Tux, you have anything you want to say or anything you want to promote?
Bow tie bless.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.